Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Feed-In Tariff information session. My name is Rebecca Billings, and I am one of the commissioners here at the Essential Services Commission. And I would like to thank you for being here today. I will be chairing today's session, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. To start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of all the lands we're meeting on today. For me, that is the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and elders of other communities who may be here today. I would like to acknowledge the connection that Indigenous Australians hold to country and culture, particularly at this time of great uncertainty. I would like to welcome you all to today's information session about the minimum feed-in tariff. I am joined by Marcus Crudden, Executive Director, and the rest of the Feed-In Tariff project team, led by Jonathan Roberts. I would also like to make a special thank you and welcome to Kelly McGregor from Solar Victoria, who will also be presenting today. I understand we have around 30 to 40 attendees, including solar customers, representatives from the solar industry, including from the Cleaner Energy Council, representatives from energy retailers, and we also have a number of commission staff and observers from government, including the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning, along with our consultants. Welcome, and thank you to all for giving up your time to be with us today. Before we get to the agenda, some quick housekeeping and ground rules that I'm sure you're all used to now in this world of Zoom. Please be aware that we are recording this information session, including any comments and questions posted during the presentations or our question and answer session. We do this so that we can post the video online for anyone who is not able to be with us today. This is part of our commitment to openness and transparency under our stakeholder engagement framework. If you have any questions or comments while someone is speaking, please type them into the chat function so that we can respond during the question and answer sections. Please keep your microphones muted when not speaking, to avoid feedback and background noise. When we get to the question and answer session, please remember that there are a number of others in the room who may like to ask questions. So everyone needs to take their turn. And finally, we know that the rate of feed-in tariffs can be an emotive issue for some. We've had some very strong feedback in the lead up to this session, and over the last few years, as the feed-in tariff has fallen as a result of the fall in electricity wholesale prices. We ask everyone to please be respectful to each other and to our staff. I urge everyone to remember, we are here to listen, but we are not here to have our motives or the professionalism of our staff questioned. Today's information session is about having a conversation. Due to the ongoing interest from solar customers on this issue, we decided to bring this session forward to before our draft decision rather than after. We invited many of those solar customers who have contacted us today to join today's session to show that our commitment to an open and ongoing dialogue is genuine. As many of you will know, many of the parameters and factors that go into the setting of the feed-in tariff are driven by the electricity market. The numbers are the numbers, and the current trend points to a lower tariff over time. But these factors are not the whole story. I would like to take this opportunity to reiterate the overarching role of the Commission to support the long-term interests of Victorian consumers. That means in all the decisions that we make, we must balance the interests of solar customers and non-solar customers. The decision about setting the feed-in tariff is not about giving retailers the opportunity to achieve excessive profits from your investment in solar power. It is about making sure that non-solar customers are not adversely impacted by an inefficient feed-in tariff that would have to be recouped from them in the form of higher prices. We will respond to your questions as best we can, but I acknowledge that there will be some issues that we will not be able to resolve for you, be it because they are outside of our regulatory role, in which case we will do our best to support a referral to the right agency for you, or because of our obligation to balance the rights of all Victorian consumers, you simply disagree with us. And at that point, we may have to respectfully agree to disagree. We plan to release our draft decision on the minimum feed-in tariff that would apply from 1 July 2022 in early December, and it will be open to submissions until late January. We are interested in hearing the perspectives of all stakeholders who are affected by this decision, and that includes everyone in the room and indeed all Victorians, whether you are a solar customer or not. Before I hand over to our other speakers today, I wanted to take just a few moments to acknowledge why we are all here today. To recognise that the renewable energy revolution is underway, and as solar customers and the solar sector, you are leading the way. This timeline shows the huge growth in Victoria's renewable energy as a percentage of electricity generation. Renewables grew by almost 300%, from 9% in 2011 to 26% in 2020. And this slide shows that the uptake in solar, and to a lesser extent the uptake in wind, are key to that renewable energy revolution. It shows that over the last decade, solar as an electricity generation source grew from almost nothing to 2,400 megawatts, and for wind, an almost fourfold increase. My reason for taking you through some of these stats is to remind us all of the broader facts that behind the trend of a falling feed-in tariff. The undeniable fact is that the solar revolution is increasing the availability of solar power, which is fantastic for the environment and our commitment to achieving net zero. Demand for expensive coal-powered electricity has dropped dramatically, and this is part of what is driving down wholesale prices. However, what this means for solar customers is that as the supply for solar is rocketing, the price is dropping, and that means a likely long-term trend of a declining feed-in tariff. Now to the rest of the agenda. Today you will hear from Kelly McGregor from Solar Victoria about the support they're providing to existing and potential solar customers. Kelly will be followed by our project manager, Jonathan Roberts, who will take you through some of the most common questions raised by stakeholders to date. He will also take you through our next steps for setting the 2022 minimum feed-in tariff. We plan to separate the two, so you'll be able to ask questions of Kelly and then she'll be dropping off, and then we'll move on to Jonathan, and then you'll be able to have questions with Jonathan and Marcus and myself afterwards. But first, I will now hand over to Kelly from Solar Victoria. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you, Rebecca, for that introduction. So as Rebecca mentioned, I'm from Solar Victoria. I'm the Manager of Media and Communications. So one of my role is to tell people about our solar rebates and the benefits of installing solar. Next slide, please. So if you don't know who Solar Victoria is, some of you may have a solar system installed through a solar homes rebate. Some of you may be early adopters and embrace solar very early on. So Solar Victoria is a Victorian government agency originally set up to deliver a $1.3 billion solar homes program. And our purpose is to enable Victorians to access affordable, reliable and clean energy. When we launched, the aim was to drive down household energy costs, offer rebates and interest-free loan options to make it more affordable for Victorians to install solar, help tackle climate change and lower carbon emissions, create and support the creation of jobs, and also see 1 million Victorian households with solar PV after 10 years. Since we've launched, Victorians have responded overwhelmingly to the change to switch to cleaner, cheaper energy. And this highlights the rapid uptake, highlights the willingness of Victorians to adopt solar technologies, take charge of their bills and reduce emissions. Next slide, please. So a little overview of who we are and what we do. Our solar home rebates and current values are on the screen. Since our launch in August 2018, as well as our rebates that have come online, we've also introduced zero interest loans, which I mentioned previously, to reduce the upfront costs of installing rooftop solar. We have a new rentals rebate stream to enable tenants to access the benefits of solar PV, and that's becoming an increasingly area of interest for tenants as they're looking for new properties to move into. We've expanded our solar battery accessibility, so now all postcodes can apply for a solar rebate if they're eligible. And we're supporting hundreds of lower income and vulnerable tenants to access cheaper and cleaner electricity through partnerships that we've established with community housing organisations. Next slide, please. So this is just a little overview of some of our, what we like to refer to as fast facts. We initially, as I mentioned, started in 2018 as a solar homes program with solar rebates. Last year, we expanded to include 3 new programs, and that includes the Solar for Business program, which is supporting the economic recovery of Victorian small businesses and the broader solar sector. So we'll be providing 15,000 solar PV rebates over 3 years for small businesses. We also expanded to include the Zero Emissions Vehicle Subsidy Program. So we're providing rebates for 20,000 new vehicles as part of the plan to meet net zero emissions by 2050 and also to support new jobs. And in June this year, we launched the Home Heating and Cooling Upgrades Program, which is helping 250,000 low-income and vulnerable households improve their thermal comfort by offering rebates to upgrade gas heaters, electric heaters, wood heaters, and no heating with energy-efficient reverse cycle air conditioners. So just in that space, we launched initially for community housing organisations, then owner-occupiers, and imminently we will be launching for rental providers to access these rebates to upgrade heating and cooling systems within their tenant, for their tenants within their rental properties. So how are we tracking after 3 years of launching? As you can see from some of those stats, there's been a huge level of interest across Victoria. More than 170,000 Victorians have successfully applied for a solar PV battery or hot water system rebate. Participants in our program are saving an average of $1,073 on their power bills. That's relating to solar PV installs. Despite the impact of the coronavirus pandemic, demand continues to boom, and that's across all our rebate streams. Of greatest significance is that the rooftop solar PV that has been installed through our solar homes program is actually helping Victoria hit its VREP targets. So in last year, 2020, we hit the 25% renewable energy target based on Solar Homes program. It was a contributing factor that got us over meeting that target. And I just wanted to give a shout out to everyone who's listening, because you are a great part of that. You, through installing solar on your rooftops, are helping us meet the targets, reduce emissions, and hopefully you're saving money.
Yeah.
Next slide, please.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I think I went on mute then. Apologies about that. So I wanted to give you a little bit of an update on the types of information that we can provide you and support you on the journey, whether you're an early adopter of solar, or you've recently installed solar, or whether you're thinking of installing solar. We have a raft of information that can support you throughout your journey. On our website, we have what we refer to as a solar hub, and it's a one-stop shop for a range of information and resources to help you. And that includes a getting started guide, a buyer's guide to assist you to identify the best system for you and your circumstances, hints on how to get the most out of your system, and information on cross-government energy programs. And the key thing we like to say when you're installing solar, whether you have or thinking about it, is that you should think about making solar savings when the sun is shining. And even when it's not shining, your solar panels can still work for you. We understand that feed-in tariffs can be an incentive for many people to install solar. We like to communicate that the main financial benefit for customers, for you, if you're installing or you have installed solar, is more so around the savings that you will be making from using the electricity that you generate in your home or business, rather than paying your retailer, so rather paying electricity rates. So whilst we understand it can be an enticement to install solar, it's not really the main benefit of installing solar. Changing the pattern of your electricity usage is key to maximising savings, and there are many more ways to ensure that you can make the most out of your solar PV system. So let's have a little look at some of those ways that you can make the best out of your system. Next slide, please. So using appliances to get the best out of the solar that you're oh, sorry.
Unknown caller.
Apologies. The solar that you're storing. So a typical household, as I mentioned previously, can save up to $1,073 a year or more. Savings can be even higher if your system is designed to match your lifestyle, and if you match your usage to when you have solar power available, rather than using mains power and paying retail rates. As previously mentioned, the best way to make the most out of your solar PV system is to avoid paying for retail energy. And you can do this by cutting your use or by making your system work for you and changing how you use your energy. For example, running your appliances like your washing machine and your dryer during the day when your energy is being generated. There's a couple more handy hints on that slide. Setting a timer is a good idea as well. If you're not at home, when life goes back to normal and we're back in the office, that can also assist you to use the energy when it's being made. Next slide, please. Keeping your system in good shape. This is really important. This is about the maintenance element of your system. So a clean and well-functioning system is going to work better for you, much like a car that's serviced. It's exactly the same principle. So your system needs to be maintained in year in and year out. It may be as simple as a wash and a clean, but please do not get on your roof yourself with a ladder. Get a professional to help you. We don't want people ending up in hospital having fallen off ladders, but it is important to maintain your system to get the best out of it. Using an app as well will help you understand what is normal and what might be abnormal generation, and can indicate when your system needs a service. As I say, you can't manage what you can't measure. So, you know, using an app is a critical tool to helping you get the best out of your system. Many people realise that trees can, well, you know that trees grow, but many of you may not realise that your trees have grown significantly and are casting shadows onto your panels, which can impact the generation of and the, you know, best use of your panels. So it's always a good idea to have a quick look up on your roof line, see if your trees are overshadowing, and have a look during different times of the day, and then attend to them if you need to. Have them trimmed back professionally so that they're not covering your panels. Next slide, please. So billing and changing habits is the final suggestion I'm going to make to you today about you know, getting the most out of your system and avoiding paying retail prices for electricity. If you haven't visited the Victorian Energy Compare website, please do. There are some financial incentives for you if you're eligible for even just putting in your current bills and seeing whether it's the best, whether you're on the best retailer product for you. I encourage everyone to go onto that and check that out. The other option is to visit the Sustainability Victoria website, which has fantastic hints on saving energy within your home. Things like, you know, closing your blinds or closing off rooms when you're heating and cooling, and adding an external blind to stop heat from bringing in harsh sun during the day, which of course then means you need to use your cooling system more to bring down the temperature. Insulating your home as well and better can assist in reducing the need for excessive heating or cooling. Simple habits like turning off or putting the lid on pans when cooking can save energy. I know that's a little thing, but all these things can add up. Next slide, please. So we've talked a lot about solar PV and how to get the best out of that system, but as I mentioned right at the start of this presentation, there are other programs and rebates that Solar Victoria offers, which you may wish to consider as well. Rebates are available for batteries, zero emission vehicles, and home heating and cooling upgrades. Final slide, please. So here's just some information, contact details for you to visit. If you want some more information, you can either visit our website, which, as I mentioned, has a range of materials wherever you are in your solar journey. If you need direct help, please call our call centre. One of the staff there can assist you and answer your questions, or you can email us, whatever is easiest for you. Thank you for your time today, and I'll hand back.
Thanks very much, Kelly, and really appreciate your time today, and hopefully some great insights for others on the line. I do understand that you have to drop off quite soon, but I'd like to open up for any questions in relation to Kelly's presentation before she heads off. Gregory.
Well, good afternoon all. Thanks for this information session. Kelly, just a quick question regarding who actually gets, once you feed in power back to the grid, who actually acquires it?
Oh, that's a technical question. Gregory, can I take that on notice? Can I get back to you? I have to be honest, I can't answer that question.
Okay, because it's pretty important.
Yep, absolutely. Let me see if are you comfortable with posting your email address?
Yeah, I will do that. Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
And the other question I have is, obviously we have had a rebate with the panels. The battery, obviously we don't qualify for, we already qualified for one of the others. Why is that?
So did you get a rebate initially when you installed solar PV?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's only one rebate available. That's just a policy decision, and it's really about enabling access to solar products as many Victorians as possible. So it's sort of sharing accessibility, I guess.
Yeah, I guess just from my point of view, that was the only one available at the time.
Yeah.
But thank you for that.
No, thank you for your questions.
Thanks, Gregory. Anna Shadbolt, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thanks,
Yeah.
Anna.
A question I want to ask is with regard to the rebates for the batteries. Because I live in a small place, even though it costs me a lot to put my solar panels up, my system's too small to be eligible for a battery rebate. Is there any reason why the cutoff is at 5 kilowatts?
I don't have the answer to that. I should explain that I was meant to have a colleague join me for this presentation who could have answered some of these questions. She had to drop off, unfortunately. So I do apologise if I'm sounding a little bit vague. I don't have the technical answer for you, but I'm more than happy to get back to you in regards to that policy decision.
It's just that I'm living on my own, I have a small apartment and I feel disadvantaged because I don't even have enough roof space to make it any bigger, and I already had hot water up there. Yeah. And that would be great if you get back to me.
Yeah. Rebecca, I'm happy to share my work email address as well if people want to directly email me. If I can't answer the question, I will find the answer for you. This is what I do every day, find answers for people that I can't answer. So, if you would feel more comfortable, anyone listening, and if there are any other questions and you want to email me directly, please do so.
Thanks, Kelly. I understand not everyone can be technical experts, and you gave a wonderful presentation. I'll ask Meg to pop your email address in the chat function.
Yeah.
Any other questions before we let Kelly go for the day? I don't see any hands, but I'm looking at Meg to see if she's seeing any hands.
No hands, but there were a couple of questions in the chat from David.
Okay.
Yep, David, are you available? Do you want to just speak to those? They seem to be around batteries as well.
No, they're probably more for ESCV, I think, rather than Kelly, who I don't want to put on the spot any further. So.
Thank you, David.
No worries. I know what it's like, believe me.
Yeah. I don't want to give you the wrong answer. Yeah, and I apologise. I have to dash because I have to pick up my kids. One of the downfalls of coming out of lockdown, I guess, is the crazy school runs again.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you, Kelly. Much appreciated, and we'll see you soon.
No worries. Okay, bye.
So at that point, I'm handing over to Jonathan Roberts.
Thanks, Rebecca. And if you're still on the line, thanks, Kelly, for telling us a little bit about the work that SolarVic does and giving us some tips on how to save with solar. So as Rebecca said earlier on, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Commission's role in setting the feed-in tariff, and hopefully in doing that, answer some questions that people might have. But we do have time for questions after the presentation. So if you've still got questions after my presentation, and I'm sure a lot of you will, we'll have time to get into them afterwards. So basically, each year we're required by law to set the minimum feed-in tariff. And we're just about to start a review, which we will finish by the end of February next year for the minimum feed-in tariffs that will apply for the next financial year. But when we're reviewing the feed-in tariffs, our objectives are to promote the long-term interests of all consumers. So that's both solar customers and other customers, and also protections for customers. And so we promote the interests of all customers by making sure that solar customers are paid a feed-in tariff that reflects the value of their solar exports to the community as a whole. So, you know, a higher feed-in tariff is obviously better for solar customers, but we also need to think about how a solar feed-in tariff might affect other customers, you know, because not everyone can afford solar panels, and people that are renting in some cases may be unwilling or unable to get panels. You know, but that said, you know, we do acknowledge that the increase in solar penetration has led to lower wholesale prices, which is good for everyone. But it also means that people who are generating electricity are getting less money for the electricity that they generate in the wholesale market. And I guess that brings us to the next objective that we have in setting feed-in tariffs, which is that we are here to protect customers, so both solar customers and non-solar customers. And so the feed-in tariff actually acts as a protection for solar customers. It's a guarantee that solar customers will get at least the same amount paid to them for their electricity as a larger, more sophisticated company with potentially more bargaining power might get when they trade in the electricity market. So I guess that takes me to the next slide then, Albert. What is the minimum feed-in tariff? So most of you will already know what a feed-in tariff is, but for those that are learning, a feed-in tariff is what retailers pay their customers for sending energy into the electricity grid. And as mentioned a moment ago, the minimum feed-in tariff provides a guaranteed export rate for solar customers. So retailers must give you at least that minimum amount, but they can give you more than that. So that's just a reminder that we set a floor, but retailers can offer customers more than that. And there are several that do. So we set two types of feed-in tariffs. One is a flat anytime feed-in tariff, and we've also got a time varying feed-in tariff. And retailers are free to offer either of them or both of them. But in practice, we tend to find that retailers generally are only offering flat feed-in tariffs. So when we set the minimum feed-in tariff, we're required by law to take several factors into account. We need to look at the wholesale price of electricity. So that's what large-scale generators are getting when they sell their electricity into the national electricity market. We are also required to look at the electricity that is saved when electricity is generated locally rather than centrally generated and then transported long distances to customers. This is also known as network losses. And we must also look at the environmental, social and health benefits of substituting fossil fuel generation with clean renewable generation. So essentially what this means is that when we're setting the feed-in tariff, that we've been asked to set it in a manner that it reflects the value that solar exports provide our community. And so a good way to think about it is that the feed-in tariff is roughly what a large-scale generator gets from the gets when it sells into the national electricity market, plus a premium on top of that, which reflects the benefits of local generation, avoiding those network losses I mentioned before, and avoiding market fees, which retailers have to pay when they buy electricity from the national electricity market, and also a little bit on top to reflect the environmental and health benefits of that sustainable generation. Next slide, thanks, Albert. So when we set the feed-in tariff, we look at each of those things that I just mentioned. When we consider the amount that should reflect wholesale prices in the national electricity market, we use information on solar generation and load that we get from electricity distributors and the market operator. And we also get contract prices which reflect market participants' expectations about what prices will be in the next year. Those contracts are traded publicly on the Australian Stock Exchange, and anyone can go on the ASX Energy website and have a look at those. So when we estimate the electricity that is saved by generating electricity locally, so the value of avoiding those network losses, we use information which is published by AEMO, sorry, the market operator, which runs the national electricity market. We use information from them where they talk about the expected losses for different parts of the network across Victoria, and we use that published information to develop loss factors, which we then use in setting the feed-in tariff. And in valuing the social cost of carbon, so that environmental benefit, there's an order in council which was made by the Victorian government, which sets out their valuation of the avoided carbon emissions from people generating using rooftop solar. We also consider health costs. We're required to consider health costs. And for 2021-22, they were set at 0. And I guess the main reason for that is that there are no accurate estimates of what those costs actually are. And there's a range of different methodologies and inputs which one could use, and no real consensus about either the methodologies or the inputs. But the outputs from those competing methodologies and assumptions range from between around 0 and about 1 cent per kilowatt hour. So next slide. So thinking about our approach and how we consider the value that the feed-in tariff provides, you can kind of compare what we do in Victoria to what's done in the rest of Australia. And you can see that we're a little bit unusual here in Victoria because we are required to assess both the avoided social cost of carbon, those environmental benefits, and also the avoided human health costs that we get from using solar PV instead of electricity sourced from the NEM, which could at times be from fossil fuel generators. Next slide, thanks, Albert. So you can also see here, if you have a look at the really small writing there underneath the bars that the feed-in tariff in Victoria does tend to be higher in other states in Victoria. I think the only one which is kind of clearly higher is the one in the Northern Territory. The one in WA there that's just the peak rate, so it's not directly comparable to our flat rate, which is what we've got there. And the main reason for that is that when we set the feed-in tariff, we do consider that social cost of carbon, those environmental benefits of of solar PV. Next slide, thanks, Albert. So one of the questions that we hear a lot from people is why is the feed-in tariff decreasing? So the main reason why it's decreasing is because wholesale prices are going down. And as Rebecca mentioned at the beginning of this session, the main driver for the decrease, the expected decrease and the continuing decrease in wholesale electricity prices is increased renewable generation, particularly during the day, when there's a large amount of solar PV both being used in people's homes and being exported. As more and more people get solar and we get more and more renewables, particularly solar PV and also large-scale solar, we would expect that trend to continue, especially during solar hours when solar PV is actually generating, exporting into the grid. And so while that's fantastic news for the environment, and also fantastic news for the wholesale prices, which flow through into people's retail rates, it does mean that feed-in rates are likely to drop over time. Next slide, thanks, Albert. So while low wholesale costs are bad news for the feed-in tariff, they are good news for retail rates, as I said before. As wholesale prices decrease, retail prices will also decrease. And we've seen this in the Victorian default offer, which we set each year. So in financial year, not financial year, we're in calendar years on the video, sorry. So for calendar year 2021, residential VDO prices were just under 10% lower than they were in 2020. And we expect that to happen again next year. So in 2022, we're expecting the Victorian default offer prices to decrease again by just under 5%. And that's mainly driven by that decrease in wholesale prices. And this is also something that we've seen in the market offers, which retailers are offering. So when we have a look at the spread of offers which electricity retailers are offering, we have also seen that they've been decreasing their market offers in line with decreases in wholesale prices. Mind you, not all retailers are doing that, so it does pay to shop around. But the median market offer has decreased as we've seen a decrease in wholesale costs and in the Victorian default offer. I guess another question then, which relates to that is, well, if retail rates are dropping, how come they haven't dropped by as much as the feed-in tariff has? And that's basically because retailers have a lot more costs than people who have solar panels on their roofs. So a retailer not only has to recover the cost of generating the electricity, which is essentially what the cost which solar customers are facing. They've got to maintain and purchase their solar panels. But on top of that cost of generating the electricity, retailers also have to pay for the transport of the electricity. they've also got to pay for their overheads associated with billing and advertising and administering and meeting regulatory requirements, including environmental obligations. And solar customers just don't have those costs. They're just generating the electricity. Next slide, thanks, Albert. So that pretty much brings me to the end of my brief, well, hopefully brief. I haven't been watching the time too closely, so I hope I haven't gone too far over time. I hope that has answered questions that people have as well. And if not, you'll have a moment to ask some after this session. But we are reviewing or about to have a review of the feed-in tariff to apply next financial year, as I said before. So we're going to release a draft decision towards the end of November or in early December. And we'll be taking submissions on that draft decision in December and January. In making submissions on our draft decision, I would really encourage stakeholders to submit on the methodology we use to set the tariff and not just on the outcome of using that methodology. Because if you're able to suggest a better way of estimating the value that solar provides the community, we can then use that feedback to have a better estimate of the value of solar. Anyway, I hope that's been useful. Look forward to your questions and also submissions on our draft decision. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jonathan. We will now start to open up to the question and answer session. The chat line has been running hot, so I think we will have a lot of questions to answer, and I'm sure some curly ones as well. I think that there's a few people who have put in multiple questions. So for those, I would ask you to think of your most pressing one as your number one question. And I will start with David Coote, given your question earlier on in the session. Thanks, David. If you wouldn't mind, if you're comfortable turning on your camera, that would be fantastic, and introducing yourself. Thank you.
Hi, well, my name is David Coote. I work for a company called Analytical Engines, where I do renewable energy modelling and for generally complicated, hybrid distributed energy resource systems. And I'm also building an energy management system. So I have a very strong interest in how sites can interact with the grid for reducing impacts on the grid, helping the grid run more efficiently, but also for customer benefit. So I've asked a load of questions, and some of them might be better off going through the more formal process later on. I'm just trying to think what would be the one that's probably the easiest one for you to answer, and probably the most important for me at the moment. I'll just go with this one, which I think is an interesting one. You've got the generation cost portion of the FIT that's currently set to sort of, I think, some kind of weighted average over the previous 12 months. What would be really interesting and incredibly useful in terms of sending a pricing signal to sites as to when they export and when they import is actually having the FIT tied more closely to NEM spot. Now, it would be harder to organise, but it'd be really strong price signal, and it would very, very strongly affect the amount. You can kind of do this a bit already through some of the retailers that offer access to NEM spot. But actually having a more formalised definition of the FIT, incorporating that would, I think, be very useful, and it will certainly encourage innovation about interaction with the grid. You've actually gone a little bit way down that track with the varying FIT. That's obviously just sort of constant across the year, whereas a truly variable FIT would just reflect what's actually going on with the grid at that point.
Thanks, David. Jono, would you like to have a crack at that to start off with?
Yeah, sure, no worries. So I guess the main thing that would prevent us from using NEM spot is that when we set the feed-in tariff, it's actually a forward-looking forecast And so because of that, the prices that actually obtain they're not something that we can really take into account because they haven't happened yet. But that said, you definitely have a point about price signals potentially being valuable, and it's for that reason that we have a time varying fit. The time varying fit that we have now, the time periods were set a few years ago now, and there's been a big change since then in market dynamics. So I think re-examining those is something that we'll be looking at in future. But at this stage, what would be most likely to move more towards is probably aligning those a little bit more with the network tariff time periods. So that having a 2-period thing where you've got, the feed-in tariff applying, at one rate for most of the day, and then at a higher rate between 3 p.m. And 9 p.m. And the idea behind that is, at this stage, most of the people and their interactions with the time varying fit is, their noggins as opposed to smart systems. But, in the future, a more dynamic system could be excellent, and we'd definitely be open to hearing suggestions about how we could do that.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks for that, David. Thanks, Jonathan. I can see a couple of hands up, but we will just take one more from the chat line first. And Michael, I think Michael Matthews, you've got a number of questions on the chat. If you could select your most pertinent one and direct it to us, it would be fantastic. If you could, if you felt comfortable turning your camera on and introducing yourself, that would be great. Thank you, Michael.
All right.
Hi.
Hello. I've really got a number of questions, and I would prefer to have them all answered. However, just to start with one, why is it that solar customers are in a way blamed for the higher prices and for non-solar customers? In other words, paying a reasonable fit will increase the costs for non-solar customers. That to me seems to be turning customers against each other, rather than looking at the fact that retail companies are charging higher and higher prices. They're skimming more and more profits. It's been reported independently that they're now getting about 13% profit, whereas under the SEC, it was thought reasonable that they got 6% profit. And it just doesn't seem fair. It seems like there's a very greedy and pampered power industry goes unchecked, while solar customers are blamed, I think unfairly, for increasing prices to non-solar customers if the fit is paid in a reasonable fee is paid for the fit.
Thanks for your question, Michael, and I'm sorry that you interpreted my words before as though I was blaming solar customers. I'm certainly not. The point that I was making was that there is a risk if we set the fit at an inefficient level that will have an impact on non-solar customers' retail prices. But I might hand over to Marcus Crudden to give a bit more of a detailed explanation. Thanks, Marcus.
Thanks, Rebecca. Thanks for your question, Michael. Look, I'm sorry if you're getting the impression that we're blaming or attributing solar customers. We're actually very supportive of solar customers, and we sort of acknowledge solar customers. And the renewable energy is putting downward pressure on energy pricing that everyone is benefiting from. I think, as Rebecca said, our concern is if we set it inefficiently high or higher than what it is in terms of wholesale prices, then it is other customers that need to cross-subsidise the tariffs. And we have to be mindful of both. I guess we get people making submissions of these inquiries, particularly around the social cost component, saying that's generous, that the solar feed-in tariffs in Victoria are generally the highest in Australia. look, it is unfortunate that they have declined with the decline in wholesale, but certainly it's not a blaming or attributing blame to customers or saying it is saying it's pushing up costs for others that at the moment we're in, I guess, a downward cycle of prices. So sorry if you got the wrong impression from what we were saying, Michael.
Well, Marcus, you say that it's we're having downward retail prices. I know from time to time that happens, but according to the Energy On website, the ESC has advised that residential customers on the flat VDO tariff will see their electricity costs increase by up to $6 a month. In comparison, most small businesses customers on flat VDO tariffs will see increases of between $12 and $32. The change will vary on the distribution zone and type of tariff structure. Now, the ESC said at the last fit that the VDO would go down and justified the lower fit basically as by saying that in time the VDO will go down as a result. The VDO has gone up. So how can you say that retail prices are going down?
Michael, I'm going to interrupt you there because you are jumping to another question. So I want to give everyone the opportunity to ask their questions. And Adele has been waiting patiently. I'm not sure whether that's your actual name, Adele, but if you were happy to introduce yourself and ask your question.
Yeah, you've got me there. It's not Adele. It's the wife's laptop. First off, thanks again for letting me join in. I'm actually full supportive of Michael and his comments, but my questions have been, in the last 2 years, I've had a reduction in my feed-in tariff of 40%. And there's been zero decrease in my cost of purchasing electricity. In fact, I've had an increase on the supply charge to the properties. And yet we keep hearing we can save up to $1,700 a year. I'm not sure where you get these figures from, because many people I know with solar panels I've spoken to haven't seen anything like that reduction, and don't understand why we keep getting a reduction on our feed-in tariff. There's no incentive to go solar. And lastly, with that question, I'm fairly sure the federal government have announced, or it's going to, but I'm pretty sure it's been passed, that come 2025, suppliers of electricity will be eligible to charge us for the electricity we supply to them. Is that a fact? And why is that not being taken into account? That we will then be classified as primary suppliers or producers of electricity. And with Jonathan, we do have maintenance costs. We mentioned, Rebecca mentioned earlier that we clean, not Rebecca, sorry, Kate mentioned earlier that we need to clean. I clean at least twice a year. And come around the 15 to 20 year mark, solar panels will need to be replaced because of their inefficiencies. And there's a maintenance cost, but you're saying we have zero maintenance costs, therefore we shouldn't be charged. We shouldn't be in it, yeah. So I don't understand why the feed-in tariff is continually going down. And as Michael's mentioned, you did quite clearly state that part of the parcel, the reason for feed-in tariff going down is because those that are supplying electricity with their solar panels, it's unfair to those that don't have it. And that just doesn't seem to be, you keep mentioning the word green, you're not going green, it's about money. A bit more facts, please. Thank you.
Thank you. You did squeeze in a few more than one question there, so we'll take a couple of those on notice. But I think your first one was in relation to the link between the feed-in tariff and the retail rate that you are getting. Marcus, would you like to respond to that question?
Look, yeah, thanks. It's probably a couple that probably relates to the last one of Michael's as well, I guess, in terms of our setting in the VDO. It did fall 10% 1st of January. The changes in August were a pass-through of network costs that were set by the Commonwealth. and we've put out a draft decision that has another 5% fall in the VDO. In terms of what individual retailers, but our monitoring of the market does show reductions in wholesale costs that I think the VDO sits at about the 60th percentile. So we are seeing lower prices and they have been declining, but I can't talk to what's happened with your individual ones. But what we do see is some falling wholesale costs. There have been network costs have been perhaps flat or slightly rising.
Yeah, well, that's just stating a fact that we all know. With the generation of electricity, I mean, those companies that appear to be from what I've seen on comparison websites, those that appear to be dropping their prices are those that have been grossly overcharging previously, and they're coming back in line with those what was considered to be find an alternative and go with a cheaper option. But there's very little cheaper options now because they're all coming down to that single baseline. So there's not been a true indication, and certainly won't be for the future, with this solar providers being classified as energy producers. Can you please answer on that one if it's official?
Sorry, I'm going to have to ask to take that one as a comment rather than a question, because there are a lot of other questions to be answered. Tony O'Loughlin, would you like to ask the question that you posted on chat?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Rebecca. Tony from Community Power Hub, Loddon Mallee. The question I had was around the methodology. It perhaps isn't a question that the Commission can answer, but I was wondering if there is any plan to review the methodology, given that it is almost 5 years old now. It was 2017 that the Ordering Council came in. Yeah, so wondering if that is going to be reviewed and updated so that the social cost of carbon factor is updated to a more accurate figure, and also include the human health costs.
Thanks, Tony. As we indicated in our previous final decision, we have received a number of stakeholder comments on this aspect of the methodology. We did indicate in our final decision that we would be engaging with government, with DELF specifically on this issue. We have been working with them over the past few months, but as indicated, it requires a change in the Order of Council, and it is unlikely that that sort of change will be imminent, but we will be articulating the next steps that we propose in terms of taking into account health costs in the draft decision paper to be released soon. Marcus, do you want to expand on that in regards to what health costs are and why it is such a sensitive issue that we need to take into consideration?
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. Thanks, Tony. Yeah, the avoided health costs, perhaps a contentious matter, given there's no agreed methodology for measuring the impacts or calculating it in the price. It's a matter we've been turning our mind to. The social costs are associated with CO2 emissions from fossil fuels, while the health costs are the non-CO2 factors, so things like nitrous oxide, sodium dioxide, and particulate matter. So it's really deriving health benefits from those matters. There aren't sort of studies we've become aware of within Victoria, while there's some international ones that would have sort of assessed, and many of these have very localised effects. So it's the absence of the robust data has been perhaps the reason why a health cost hasn't been set thus far within the approach. The other thing, though, is because the social costs are set with a top-down method that relates to reducing emissions, there's likely to be some overlap there between the two forms of factors, because as emissions go down, those things that contribute to health effects are also reduced. So look, it's something we're turning our mind to. That is also, though, something on health costs. There's nothing within the pricing order, whereas there is for social costs. It's not it's a fairly complex matter, and I guess studies internationally tend to show a wide variety of answers, so there's not an off-the-shelf number or something to apply within it.
Thanks, Marcus, and thanks, Tony, for your question. Gregory, you've been sitting there patiently with your hand up. If you would like to introduce yourself again and ask your question.
Thanks, Rebecca. Jonathan, please don't take this the wrong way, but as part of your team, I'd just like to know that, because obviously you're making some very important decisions, just the background, experience and qualifications of the team. And the second part is, in the factors, I really think you should consider maintenance replacement as part of the factors that you should be considering for people who own solar panels. And by the way, I'm just a customer supplier, I guess.
No such thing as just a customer, Gregory. Thanks for your question. Look, I don't know the qualifications of everyone in the team off the top of my head. So I think that might be a question that we take on notice. But rest assured that we do have the right skill set within the Commission, but also supplemented by consultants where appropriate. So that is absolutely something that we take very seriously, to have the technical expertise to undertake this work. So thank you, Gregory. Justin, I think you are next up. You posted a question on chat. Would you mind turning your camera on if you're happy to do so and introducing yourself?
Yes, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to speak in this at this meeting, and thanks for all your time and everything. And I'd just like to firstly say thanks to Adele and Michael and also Gregory for their questions, because they're raising some very important real world questions from users. Obviously, they're all solar users. And I totally agree with all the questions that have been asked from them. But there's one question I'd like to ask. I have a few questions myself, but there's one in particular that I'd like to ask, and that is the outrageous proposal of a sun tax, time-varying feed-in tariffs, and the possible lowering of feed-in tariffs for the future will force and encourage current and prospective solar owners to go off-grid. This in turn would place more burden and costs to on-grid customers. My question is, can it be confirmed at this meeting that current solar owners, such as myself, will be able to permanently disconnect from the grid without any penalty or any introduced regulation?
Thanks, Justin. I think just to touch off with in regards to what's referred to as the sun tax, while that has been announced as a potential federal government policy, there is quite a distinction between the federal government and the Victorian government in the energy space. As the independent regulator, I'm not allowed to comment on what the state government's policy might be in that regards. But I can tell you that from publicly available information, the state government has submitted to the consultation process so far on the so-called sun tax that it did not support introducing an export charge. I can't say whether that's something that will flow through to policy or legislation, but that's what has been announced publicly to date. In regards to one of your other questions, I will throw to Marcus. Thanks, Marcus.
Yeah, I'm not sure I could give any easier answer about whether you can go off the grid without any penalty or anything. As far as I believe you can, but it's, again, the Commission has a fairly narrow task here within feed-in tariffs. It doesn't actually set the policy perspectives on these matters. I do agree, if people do exit grid, there is always risks of sort of death spiral arguments. So that can be a concern, but we don't set the policy settings here.
Yeah, well, thanks for your answer. It's my concern is I've been a long-term solar customer for well over a decade, so I've been fortunate enough to get the premium feed-in tariff for some years, which has been great. And it's been an incredible incentive to uptake solar, of course. But one would imagine that with the sort of advancing of batteries and that sort of thing, which my plan is to completely disconnect from the grid, and all the power that I generate is for my use, and it's not just being totally put into a grid that I'm getting pretty much no return on.
Look, I think a general comment would be, if that's the way you wish to go, I guess that is an option. Probably most people won't go down that path. Do agree, and perhaps the earlier presentation by Solar Vic is probably the incentives have moved away from things like the premium tariff to more upfront incentives around subsidising equipment. So, those sort of tariffs was closed off, I think, 2011. There are still a number of people on them. Again, fall outside this process. I know perhaps there were some people agitated when the feed-in tariffs were set last year. They're on those premium tariffs that some correspondents implied they were finishing off or being reset to the feed-in rate, which wasn't correct. So I think there was some alarms set to some customers there as well.
Great, thanks for your answer.
Thanks, Justin, and thanks, Marcus. Heyo, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. Would you like to turn your camera on if you're comfortable and introduce yourself?
Hi everyone. Sorry, I won't be able to turn on my camera on, but yeah, this is Hao, and I'm working for energy retailer in charge of the wholesale market and the cost pricing. So I think there's a bit of myth about how much the solar feed-in really worth. So I would like to ask ESC to provide the data to support. Basically, can ESC publish, like, on every half-hourly basis, how much solar generation is feed into grid across the whole Victoria state, and what's the wholesale market price at that point of time, and then apply for each financial year to see, compared to, because the retailer was forced to buy those generations at a fixed price defined by the ESC, but the wholesale market is given different pricing, and at a year-by-year basis, is there any difference? What the difference is? And then probably will help answer some of those misses.
Thanks, Hal. I'll direct that one straight to Jono, if that's all right, Jono.
Yep, absolutely. So, yep, good question there, Hal. So basically, that information on export isn't ours. We'd have to ask the distributors if they're okay with us publishing that information. Yeah, in terms of, as you'd be aware, the way that we forecast wholesale costs is forward-looking. And so, the trends in the past don't necessarily mean that that's how things are going to continue in future. So when we're thinking about what wholesale prices might be for the next year, we have a look at what the market is saying. But look, I think that's an interesting avenue of investigation to see how much our estimate of the wholesale cost during solar hours is, and probably worthwhile looking into to check how our forecasting methodology has been performing against market data.
Yeah, sorry, just one little thing here. Probably I look at your methodology, you're missing the volume. You're not mentioning the volume, because obviously during lunchtime, when the sun is strongest, and then the wholesale price is actually lowest, and the solar panel feeds in the most. So the volume and the price both need to put it into the equation rather than just the wholesale price when the solar is generation. Because at the evening, afternoon, like 5 p.m., the wholesale price is highest, but we receive the least amount of feed-in tariff from solar panels. And the particular evening, the price goes much higher again. So therefore, I guess in your methodology, I only see the price in the during solar powers and then not the volume. Is it something AES is going to adjust?
Sorry, what do you mean by a variant?
Like the variance, sorry, the variance, the amount of actual
variance.
energy being fed in grid at a different time, rather than just pricing alone.
That is a comment now, Hal, because we are starting to run out of time. A really interesting conversation, and I'm sure Jono would be happy to chat to you offline on that one.
Cool.
Michael, I can see you've got a thumbs up there, and I know that you had a number of questions. So if you'd like to have your second question for the day, Michael.
Well, thank you very much. I'd just like to sort of do a follow-up. I'm not sure who the gentleman was who said this. It's a follow-up on the human health care costs. I've got a question, follow-up question and a comment. Why does the ESC not include human health care costs and back pay solar customers for the exclusion of this component in the FIT over the past 6 years? Because the ESC has been going for 6 years. It has been tasked with including human health care costs, and it never has. Human health care costs are a component of the FIT that are acknowledged but not included by the ESC as they should be. The reason the ESC gives is that it is too hard to calculate. Other organisations have had no trouble doing this. The Australian Academy of Technological Sciences and Engineering found that coal was responsible for health impacts costing Australians $2.6 billion a year. This should raise the FIT substantially. I'd like Marcus to comment, please.
Thanks, Michael. Before Marcus jumps in, can I just say that I absolutely acknowledge that there are costs associated with climate change and human health costs, and that some organisations have attempted to estimate the cost of that, but they haven't done it within the context of setting a FIT. As Jono had put up in his presentation, there is no other jurisdiction in Australia that has attempted to do this. And I'll pass on to Marcus.
Thanks, Michael. As we said, we are setting our mind to it, but should also clarify that what it have regard to is actually the avoided health costs of air pollution. So it's not what are the health costs, it's how much health costs may be avoided by the displacement of coal-fired generation by rooftop solar. It's not actually calculating what are all the health costs involved. And that is like methodologies for that appear to be fairly contentious, and the values ascribed to that sort of range from 0 to quite low. And also they tend to be very localized. So we are saying there's not a comparable methodology being developed. There's nothing in the pricing order that gives guidance. If we can develop, or the government can develop up a methodology, we'll look to set it. As we said, there is also likely to be some overlap with the social costs, given the way the social cost has actually been set, which is a top-down approach. But welcome if you can point to studies that have attempted this with the avoided costs, would be welcome to be made aware of them.
Thanks, Marcus, and thanks, Michael. Marissa, I think we have a question from you on the chat box. Would you like to introduce yourself and ask your question?
Hi there, my name's Marissa. I've just a quick question, and maybe I'm after just a bit of clarification, that throughout this conversation, we've been talking about feed-in tariff as if all consumers will receive a feed-in tariff. However, a lot of solar consumers that are yet to install solar won't receive a feed-in tariff because they'll be on a zero export. And how is that taken into account when we are setting future feed-in tariffs?
Sure. Thanks for your question, Marissa. I might ask Jonathan to respond to that one.
Yeah, thank you for your question, Marissa. Yep, it's a good one. So basically, under the methodology that we use at the moment, we don't need to make any assumptions about the number of solar customers. And so, you know, if there are solar customers who have a zero export limit or not, doesn't really affect the number. What we look at is we look at the value that if some hypothetical customer were generating electricity and feeding it into the grid, the value that they would be providing our community. So how much are people paying for electricity? What is the value that the market has discovered for that electricity generation? And so because of that, we can assume any level of solar customers, and it won't change our answer on what the feed-in tariff should be, because the wholesale price is set in a competitive market.
Thanks.
Thanks for that, Jonathan. We are quickly running out of time here, but I did want to give retailers the opportunity to have anything, if they had anything to say or any questions at this point in time. We've heard a lot from consumers and would like to open the floor to any solar retailers or other energy retailers at this point. I'll give you 2 seconds more. No, all good. All right. Well, I'd like to remind everyone that we are happy to continue to receive questions. You have Kelly's email address in the chat box, so hopefully you've been able to find that if you would like to ask Kelly any questions. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank everyone for their participation today. As you know, it's a very important issue, and we've found it very valuable to hear from you all firsthand about the issues and the questions that you have. All of these questions and comments today will be considered when we make our draft decision on the minimum feed-in tariff that will apply from 1 July 2022. Again, we encourage you to make comments or a formal submission to our draft decision via Engage Victoria, and all those details will be in the draft decision released sometime in early December 21. And just to reiterate, the public consultation will run from December 21 to January 2022, and we will release our final decision in late February 2022. There's been some excellent conversation points today, and thank you to everyone for taking the time to contribute to the conversation. In closing, can I thank our presenters again, the project manager, Jonathan Roberts, and Kelly from SolarVic. Thank you all and be well. Have a nice day.